Katie, Girl About Library, and I'm here today to talk to you about 5 things I learned from Malcolm Gladwell's newest book, Talking to Strangers. I have always really enjoyed reading nonfiction. If there's like a fiction story and a nonfiction book about the same thing, the nonfiction book is probably going to be more impactful for me. The story in that one is going to feel more real to me. The heroes are real people, and so the emotions and the impact of it feel more real. I hope I have found a format for talking about the things I'm learning in nonfiction books and just sharing like the ideas that they present, because sometimes you're not necessarily learning facts, but you are learning different like concepts to consider. So today we're going to be talking about Malcolm Gladwell's newest book. It's Talking to Strangers, and let's get started. Number 1, let's talk about what this book is actually about, because right off the bat, just the material of this book was really interesting. The concept of talking to strangers appealed to Malcolm Gladwell and was something he wanted to do like an investigative journalism piece about because of the SANDRA Bland case, which I will have links down below to like news articles, just like relevant information. Check that out, and saw the coverage about Sandra Bland and was really interested in that interaction, and I'll be talking more about that at the end of the video. But he was really curious, not just in that case, but in many others, just in our daily lives, why it is that we're so bad sometimes at talking to and interpreting strangers. And there are 2 different psychology terms that Malcolm Gladwell uses to describe some of the problems that we typically encounter. The first one is default to truth. So default to truth is that our operating assumption is that the people we are dealing with are honest. And the other one is transparency. And so transparency is the idea that people's behavior and demeanor, the way they represent themselves on the outside, provides an authentic and reliable window into who they are on the inside. Both of those ideas are obviously deeply, deeply flawed, but we use them. That's the thing. And that's what's so interesting about Malcolm Gladwell's books, is that he takes things that you kind of take for granted. People aren't always telling the truth. Not everyone is who they appear to be, but he shows you all of the different ways that we have built a society where we assume those things to be true. Which brings me to the second thing that I learned, which is that meeting strangers makes us worse at interpreting them and making sense of them than if we hadn't met them at all. Malcolm Gladwell has several really good examples of this, but the one that was most interesting and also just terrifying to me, well, there's another one that we'll cover later that's like extra scary. I really found the example that he used regarding showing remorse and how we set bail to be fascinating. So if you haven't personally experienced it, the current way that bail is determined if you are accused of a crime is that you go in front of a judge and they decide whether or not they are going to set bail for your case. They have the option of releasing you and letting you go until your trial date, or setting a monetary value that you would have to pay a portion of in order to be released. So, to Malcolm Gladwell's point, because society operates on transparency, because we assume that people are what they present themselves as, we have built the bail system this way because we want judges to be in front of the person. We want the judge to look at them, decide what kind of person they are by looking at them. Just me saying it out loud, it sounds like a problem. But it turns out humans are terrible at this. Gladwell refers to a study in this book where they took 500,000 cases that judges had determined bail on. Either they had let the person go until their trial or they had set a bail amount. They gave the 500,000 cases to a computer with an algorithm. And that computer, with much less information than a judge, in a way, because the judge is able to see the person and we assume that that provides some value. This computer did a way better job at predicting who would and wouldn't violate their bail. The machine flagged 1% of the defendants as just do not let these individuals go. They are high risk. They're definitely not coming back, or they're definitely going to commit a crime when they leave. And 50% of the time, the judge let that person go with no bail. They were free to roam until their trial. Applying real world applications, the fact that a judge and the way that we've built like the bail system is so deeply flawed. And as upsetting as that example is, when I hit fact number 3, I had to stop reading for a little bit. Like, I had to take a break because it was so upsetting to me. Oh, okay. I kind of knew this before reading the book, but like actually having to like read it definitely hurted. Like I hate flying. If you know me, you know this. I hate flying. But there's something very comforting to me, or there was before reading this book, about going through TSA. It's like a great equalizer. We all have to take our shoes off, we all have to walk through this machine, and it just provides this sense of security to me, even though that's not the most terrifying thing to me about flying. It's helpful, and I'll take it. So earlier we talked about default to truth, which is that we have to go about our days in order to function as a society, assuming that when someone is telling us something, they're not lying. And Malcolm Gladwell explores how this might account for some issues that we experience with TSA. Because for all of the effort that TSA puts into what they do, I mean, if you've ever gone through airport security, they'll tell you what's up. On occasion, TSA conducts audits, as they should, where they purposefully plant a fake bomb, a fake gun into luggage and see, how often it's caught. And I would have guessed a lot of way more comforting numbers before I came up with the number that Malcolm Gladwell quoted in this book, which is that 95% of the time, 95% of the time, they don't catch the fake bomb. They don't catch the fake gun. And the author goes out of his way to point out that he is not saying that TSA does not work hard, that they are lazy, or that they're bad at their jobs, but rather that with the millions of pieces of luggage that they are screening, someone could do a spectacular job every single day at work and really never come across anything illicit. And so it is very hard for us as humans to keep the same level of questioning, to just completely fight that default to truth in order to accurately and more than 95% catch when stuff like that comes through. Let's move on to something more positive. While Malcolm Gladwell does show times when these assumptions we make about strangers are kind of messing things up, he also shows the potential in fighting those assumptions that we make about strangers, particularly in mental health. So fact number 4 deals with Sylvia Plath and the idea of behavior coupling. Before starting this book, I knew who Sylvia Plath was. Like, I'm 95% sure I'd read The Bell Jar. And I knew that she had committed suicide, but beyond that, I didn't really know that much about her. So in 1962, when Sylvia committed suicide, she did it the same way that 44% of people in England committed suicide, which is carbon monoxide poisoning. At that time in England, carbon monoxide was easily available through stoves. In the 1960s though, England decided to switch to another kind of gas. And so what they were using that gave off carbon monoxide, they switched to another one, making that particular form of suicide impossible. I think a common assumption that is held about people who are suicidal and are in that place in their mental health is that they're just gonna find another way to do it. Like, you can take the carbon monoxide away, but they're either desperate enough or their mental state is such that they're just gonna find another way to do it. What they found instead is really interesting, and I think from a mental health standpoint, incredibly encouraging. And that is that they don't. That's not how it works. Instead, what they found was the opposite. Suicide rates dropped dramatically. And that assumption that we have about strangers or our family and our friends is false. Suicide, more than likely, is a coupled behavior. If you take away the thing that they were going to use, then that action falls away. Suicide by carbon monoxide shot up like crazy when that gas first became available readily in a home. But as soon as it was made unavailable, they dropped. Another really interesting example that he used of this was the Golden Gate Bridge. For a long time, there was not like a catching mechanism on the Golden Gate Bridge for someone who would attempt to commit suicide, and it was a commonplace for people to choose to do that. And of the 500 people who were caught, only 25 of those people went on to do it in another way. And so I just, like, that's fascinating to me, and also like really encouraging to know that you can influence someone who feels like they're just on the brink. Challenging that assumption that we have about strangers or family and friends can save lives. As encouraging as that point is, the fifth thing that I want to talk about that I got out of this book is that this book is a little bit problematic. This author, in his books and his TED Talks and his just journalistic persona, has always really challenged people to look again at the way that they live their life or the assumptions that they've made. Everything is much more complicated than it appears to be. And I've always really appreciated that, and that's why I've always enjoyed reading his books. Like I said at the beginning of the video, Gladwell was motivated to write this book because of the Sandra Bland case, and I'll have our articles linked down below. He doesn't just talk about the Sandra Bland case, he also talks about Brock Turner, he also talks about Larry Nassar, he also talks about the Penn State guy whose name I've decided to forget. Reading the chapters on these cases that I'm pretty familiar with, it's impossible to go through and not notice that the conversation that is being had around these, so Sandra Bland and racism, Brock Turner and rape culture, that's not the discussion that Malcolm Gladwell has in the book. I think racism itself was actually only mentioned one time, the entire time he's talking about the Sandra Bland case, which isn't to say that Malcolm Gladwell doesn't think that that's part of it, but it definitely doesn't help his argument that he doesn't even address it. And so something to know going into this book, and also something to consider and maybe a reason to read this book. I don't know. It comes across as him trying to explain racism and rape culture and male privilege away with pop psychology terms, and that's not gonna fly. I'm really interested to see how this all plays out. I did read an Entertainment Weekly article where the person who was interviewing him kind of touched on this, and he did mention that in the Brock Turner chapter, he had sensitivity readers give him feedback and that the chapter was much stronger because of that. It felt weird. It felt weird to read about these things without the conversation. So that's it, guys. Those are the 5 things that I learned from reading Talking to Strangers. I'm definitely glad that I read this book. I'll read another book by Malcolm Gladwell, but I'm really interested to see how the conversation develops as more people read this. It's definitely a book that will stick with me as I'm interacting with strangers, and especially as I'm going through TSA. Have you read this book? Comment down below. Let me know what you thought of it, or let me know what you think about the different things that I learned from the book. If you enjoyed this video, give me a thumbs up and let me know that you want me to keep making these. Thank you so much for reading and for watching. Have a great day.